just in time. May I ask then Climate Action Network? Thank you.
How do I start this? Oh, yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, to present some observations by the Climate Action Network. My name is Jan Kowalczyk and I work for Oxfam. I don't need to go into this slide because my previous speaker has most eloquently illustrated the point about the gigaton gap. So let me move on quickly. Addressing this gigaton gap is what you are here for. This is part of, this is part of the workshop as was mandated by the Cancun agreements, where paragraph 38 clearly says look at ways and options to increase the level of ambition. We noted the slides in the presentation by the European Union that had some interesting slides on this as well, so we're very much with them. We missed a bit regarding how the EU itself could make its own pledge more ambitious and more consistent with 1.5 and 2 degrees, because clearly the current 20 or even 30% is not consistent with that in our view. But we agree with the EU, and we are with the EU in the strong hope that everyone here in the room agrees there is such a gap and that it must be closed. Just for the context of your mandate to look into increasing ambition, especially since many developed countries have attached to the high end of their pledges or even to their pledges conditions related to what they sometimes call meaningful mitigation by developing countries. And there are many ways to look at what is meaningful mitigation. This year is work carried out by the Stockholm Environment Institute, and it's going to be published very soon, and that shows that in absolute amounts, that means gigatons, compared to BAU, actually developing countries' pledges will result in more emission savings than the developed countries, and this is both for low target case as well as for the high target case. So I think that's very interesting to those that have these conditions attached to their pledges, and in particular when considering when and how these conditions to move to the high end of the pledges are going to be met. So greater clarity on that from the side of developed countries would be very helpful. Given that we are already at the end of the workshop, so my presentation can't tell you what you should be doing in this workshop, I can only tell you what you should take from here. So here's some recommendations from the Climate Action Network. Number one is developed countries will need to clarify what the net domestic emissions are going to be in 2020. That would allow the Secretariat to update their technical paper and remove some of the unclarities that are still in there. And we also need to better understand that actually what is actually going to be the size of this gigaton gap, so we know it as best as possible. And we also want to better understand what is the real effort by developed country parties to reduce their emissions. The second step would be Durban, at the latest by Durban, you must close all the loopholes that are currently built into the system or being proposed to add into them. And for us, this means do not adopt LULUCF rules based on some bogus projections into the future about possible emissions of that sector, designed to actually hide emissions. Instead, use historic reference levels, and also make sure you count all emissions into that sector, Second, ensure that market and non-market flexible mechanisms do not distract from the developed countries, from the need for developed countries to decarbonize their economies completely by mid-century, and do not allow hot air to undermine environmental integrity. And this should speak to those countries with pledges that are designed to bring even more hot air into the system. And this is already my last slide. I should maybe say most developed countries have actually pledges that are below, even far below the 25 to 40% range recognized in the Cancun agreements and before. From these countries with these low targets, we would like to know which other developed country is going to compensate for the low targets that you have given yourself in order to allow the group of developed countries to move into the 25 to 40% range. And we also would like to know how are these targets that you have pledged are consistent with your country's fair share of the globally needed mitigation efforts. Oh, sorry. How can I go back? Yeah, this is my notes are not consistent with these slides. My final point on that slide is, now this workshop was mandated to look at increasing ambition or looking at ways to increase ambition. In our view, this did not happen so far, neither in Bangkok nor here. So we urge you to report back to your capitals that currently countries' levels of ambition across the board are far away from these countries, developed countries' fair share of the globally needed mitigation efforts, putting the world onto a track to disastrous climate change. So you must come back with a mandate to really begin addressing, and for the sake of the people already suffering from climate change, actually closing the gigaton gap by increasing emissions. And for that, and that's my last point, you will need to do three things. Step number one, developed countries need to move to the high end of their pledged ranges, if they have pledged ranges, and if need be, clarify what conditions are attached to moving to the high ends, and also make an objective and transparent assessment what part of these conditions have already been met, and what will it take to remove the remaining conditions so that you actually can move to the high end of the pledges. Second, you will, even after you've done that, you will need to recognize there will still be a remaining gigaton gap, which UNEP says is about 5 gigatons. So you will have to start addressing this gigaton gap, and we believe you need to start doing this at the latest in Durban by discussing a fair sharing of the global mitigation effort that is needed to close down this gap. And we disagree with those that say wait for the review, because we believe the review is too late. Science tells us any more delays are making the 1.5 or 2 degree temperature target even more unlikely, if not impossible. So do not wait for that. And that, as a result of that fair effort sharing, developed countries will have to move beyond the high end of their current pledges. We know this is politically difficult, but do not try to tell us that not doing that or doing any less will be sufficient to remain on a path consistent with 1.5 or 2 degrees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. You made